In this episode of Ideacity,
You can't go more than 3 to 6 minutes without oxygen, but we know that it causes many age-related illnesses. Oxygen, which we need to live, is poisonous.
This is Dr. Charles Cantor. He's an amazingly prolific publisher of peer-reviewed articles. It says here he's done 450 of them. And at the same time, you can see that he's also a serial entrepreneur and has started quite a number of fascinating companies. So, Dr. Cantor, tell us how you modulate all of that and what the results might be.
So this story belongs to Retrotope, which is a 6-person pharmaceutical company that I founded about 8 years ago, together with Misha Chepanov, who's a brilliant Russian chemist, and Bob Molinari, who was an experienced CEO in the space. To motivate you, let me remind you that several of the previous speakers today asked you to take a deep breath, and I watched, and you complied. And that may be dangerous for your health. Now, you say, well, what about a shallow breath? Equally dangerous to your health. Why is that? Well, oxygen, which we need to live, is poisonous. Okay? You can't go more than 3 to 6 minutes without oxygen. But we know that it causes many age-related illnesses, and you'll see some of those discussed. So this is the paradox. We have to have it, but it eventually kills us. And the particular diseases that it aggravates are focused on the central nervous system, and that includes dementia, senility, and blindness. So how as a species, how did humans get into this mess? Where we have to have it, but it makes our life miserable. This appears to be a problem of evolution. As far as we can guess, ancient primates discovered seafood. You all love seafood, I hope. And seafood contains certain types of fatty acids, which enabled our brain to grow bigger and more complex, and enabled our visual system to become more acute. But those fish oils and some other oils from plants like corn are flammable, and they burn in the body, and they lead irrevocably to damage and, in some cases, death. Now, the key thing is that this accumulated oxygen damage is slow, and it doesn't affect normal people in their 30s. And so when we were an ancient species, nobody lived beyond their 30s, as this slide shows. The old people, amazingly, is a phenomenon pretty much of the recent centuries. I mean, there are anecdotal examples of people living, Methuselah 1,000 years, probably not true. But old age is a modern phenomenon. And people who get sick with things that don't jeopardize their reproductive capability, evolution has no chance to remove or try to solve those problems, and so they just get worse and worse. No antioxidant strategy has ever worked. You can eat as much blueberries as you want. It's not going to help you avoid Alzheimer's.
great ideas are meant to be shared. Join the discussion on Facebook.
a site of damage where oxygen is used and abused is the mitochondrion, which they refer to as the furnace of the cell. And the good news is the mitochondrion is a fantastically efficient furnace. It uses oxygen 98% efficiently. You can't do that in your furnace. Unfortunately, the 2% that's not used efficiently produces stuff which is extremely hazardous, very, very bad for your health. Now, I'm not going to give you a quiz on this, don't worry. But what this shows is the problem in dealing with oxygen in the body is we don't know how to, the body does not know how to convert oxygen to water in a single step. Oxygen itself is actually safe. Water is obviously safe. But in between, I won't bother to name them, are 3 intermediates, which are very dangerous. And I can give you a recent personal experience about the middle one, hydrogen peroxide, because I usually carry a tiny vial of it with me when I travel to brush my teeth with. It's actually a pretty good prophylactic. And it was spotted during random screening at Heathrow a few weeks ago, and they practically strip searched me. They thought I was carrying a bomb, because concentrated hydrogen peroxide, of course, can be used to build bombs, but not the tiny dilute amounts that we have for dental prophylaxis. So the body is very good at trying to keep this pathway under control so that things don't get unbalanced. And if they get unbalanced in the slightest, it causes immense problems. And the one that may be familiar to some of you is Down syndrome, Trisomy 21. So the problem in Down syndrome is that superoxide dismutase, which is an enzyme that takes oxygen through superoxide to hydrogen peroxide, exists in 3 copies in these unfortunate individuals, whereas catalase, the enzyme which catalyzes the next 2 steps, exists in only 2 copies. And this slight imbalance cannot apparently be corrected for by the body. And so in addition to other problems, Down's individuals typically develop Alzheimer's in their 40s, which is really disastrous, okay? Just because the oxygen is being slightly mismanaged. Okay, so scientists know about this problem for years and years, and don't bother to read this. I could have picked 20 others, right? Oxygen is linked to Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, rare things like Friedreich's ataxia, common things like diabetic retinopathy, all sorts of diseases that we're trying to cope with. It's linked to them. The body knows about this too. Here's an amazing statistic. The human brain is only 1.5% of the total body weight, but it uses 20% of the energy. And 1/4 of the total energy used by the brain is consumed to try to repair these damaged fats, these inappropriately burning fats. So this is a very serious problem. And let's now dig a little deeper. The 2 classes of fats which are components of our diet, one of them is called an omega-6, and in Western diets it predominantly comes from corn oil. And another one is called omega-3, and it predominantly comes from fish oil. These are essential nutrients. You must eat them. Many of you probably take nutritional supplements. These things are sold all over the world as nutritional supplements, and that's not wrong. But just like oxygen, and I'm going to show you, these are very harmful. They're essentially gasoline. And in an individual who's compromised and is sensitive to oxidative stress, these burn and cause damage. Now, that damage is especially pernicious. These fatty acids can burn. And the immediate product, unfortunately, doesn't stop, but destroys the next fatty acid to it, and the next one, and the next one. And this is a cascade. It's like a chain reaction in an atomic bomb. And pretty soon, from a single oxygen species, you could have thousands of damaged fatty acids, okay? And this is why no antioxidant strategy has ever worked. You can eat as much blueberries as you want. It's not going to help you avoid Alzheimer's, okay? Furthermore, the body, once it detoxifies these damaged fatty acids, generates extremely poisonous substances which sensitize the mitochondria to be more susceptible to damage. So this is a double whammy, okay? And this has been with us since we evolved as a sort of higher primate. The effect of just changing 2 hydrogens for 2 deuteriums is dramatic. It's black and white. It's life and death.
Get the latest Ideacity news instantly. Follow us on Twitter.
So what can we do about it? And this is the concept of Misha Stepanov, and it's embarrassingly simple. And as you'll see, it's looking extremely good. The natural dietary substances are shown here, pardon the chemistry. And what Misha realized is that the particular positions which are burnt by oxygen at the first step of lipid damage are a special kind of position. Chemists call this allylic carbons. Okay? And if he could put deuterium, the heavy form of hydrogen, at these positions in place of natural, the chemical properties, the biochemical properties of these deuterated fats should be identical to normal dietary fats as long as you don't try to burn them. But if you try to burn them, oxygen tries to attack this position, which otherwise is not used by cell metabolism, and you slow it down. It turns out that you slow it down a lot. We were lucky. The rate at which a deuterium slows things down is hard to predict, but the effect got big. Now here's an example of that, and I have to explain this just a bit. These are yeast cells. This is the classical microbiology experiment that many of you probably did in high school classes, except you probably did it with bacteria instead of yeast. What you do is you plate different numbers of cells, and you see that if you have a huge number of cells, the colonies are confluent, there's no way to see. But if you plate relatively few cells, you can see individual colonies. Each came from a single yeast so that you can count the number of live yeast. And normal yeast don't care if there are fatty acids in their medium, if there's normal hydrogen-containing polyunsaturated fatty acids or deuterated, they grow. But if you give yeast linoleic acid, a substance that humans must eat in order to survive, if you give them this compound, you can see they can't grow. It's completely toxic to yeasts that are slightly oxidatively sensitized, as on the bottom. If you give them the deuterated compound, you can see that they're growing perfectly well. And just as a control, if you put the deuterium in the wrong place, it's toxic. Okay? So what I'm showing you in yeast is that the effect of just changing 2 hydrogens for 2 deuteriums is dramatic. It's black and white. It's life and death. Okay? Well, who cares about yeast? All right? What about human cells? Okay? So here are 3 human cells. I won't go through this in detail, but it's basically the same experiment as was done in yeast, summarizing it. The left hand is a nice model for Parkinson's disease using human nerve cells. The middle one for Alzheimer's disease using, again, human nerve cells. And the right one, an orphan disease called Friedreich's ataxia, using cells from those patients. And if you just look at the right one, you can see that as I add blue, natural fatty acid to the diet of these cells, it kills them. Same problem, okay? But if I add the deuterated compound, you can see, at least initially, it protects them. Okay, so we have gigantic effects just by changing hydrogen for deuterium. It's really pretty amazing. Now, in those experiments, I made a complete substitution. That is, the organisms, the human cells or the yeast, either got to see all deuterium or all natural, nothing in between. Obviously, in a human being, I can't substitute all of your body fat with deuterated fat. So we asked the question in yeast, and also the same results in mammalian cells, how much substitution do we have to do in order to stop the fire? And the answer is we get significant effects with very small substitutions. And by the time we reach 1 in 5, we can completely shut off the fire. We can reach 30% substitution in 3 months of dosing, well over the threshold that we need to get complete protection.
Get the latest Idealist news, presenter information, and watch streaming video at ideacityonline.com.
So you see where I'm going. I want to try to do this with you, okay? But before I get there, I better try it with animals first. And these are mice that have had 90 days of a very expensive diet in which they were either fed deuterated lipids or hydrogen-containing lipids. Of course, starting from their natural diet of hydrogen-containing lipids, they were actually fed linoleic or linolenic, these two omega-3 and omega-6 dietary components. But in the brain of these mice, those are converted biochemically to longer chain fatty acids. Arachidonic is something you may have heard of. DHA you probably haven't. But the bottom line of this slide is that we can reach 30% substitution in 3 months of dosing, well over the threshold that we need to get complete protection. And we don't seem to change anything about the normal metabolism, except that we're putting deuterium in place of hydrogen. So this looks extremely good, and it encourages us to try it on people. Well, we found an orphan disease, and you've already seen a hint of it, called Friedreich's ataxia. And within the next 30 days, if we're lucky, we'll begin to start enrolling patients who have that disease to test them with this approach. It's a very, very sad disease. Basically, these patients are on fire, probably from their early teens. Every organ that depends on the mitochondrial furnace self-destructs. They usually actually die of a heart attack, but meanwhile, they can't balance. They're going senile and going blind and so on. Very serious disease. And we'll see how we do. Here's the last problem. You eat in your normal diet, especially if you eat a typical unhealthy Western diet, 14 grams, which is quite a bit, of linoleic acid a day, because we're all eating, French fries and McDonald's and things like that. And we have much less of the omega-3 fatty acid. And our patients might eat this stuff. We're obviously going to counsel them to try to stay off these fats in the natural diet, so the supplementation that we do will be more effective. But this is going to be a problem. The good news is that everything else being equal, low-fat diets are healthy. We have a potential placebo problem here. But if we are successful in our clinical trials and can start giving these drugs more broadly to the general population, a corollary will be that you'll all probably have to go on low-fat diets, but that's going to be good for you anyway. Okay, so if we're right, and we'll know within anywhere from 6 to 18 months if we're right, this is going to work in Friedreich's, and it's going to justify trying it in Alzheimer's, in Parkinson's, diabetic retinopathy, 30 or 40 other diseases. We have preliminary promising model data, but none of it on people. So I have to stress, while this is tremendously exciting, we're really jumping up and down to get started. You never know with people until you actually do the clinical trial. People are not mice. So finally, I just want to indicate this is a collaboration of more than 50 groups worldwide. And these are some of the people, as you can see, spread all over the world from Moscow to California, who've helped us in what I showed you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cantor.
Ideacity is a place where ideas come face to face to inspire and give us hope. At this time, our planet needs it most. Ideacity is a place. Everybody sing. Where ideas come face to face to inspire and give us hope. At this time, our planet needs it most. Ideacity, gotta bring your ideas to Ideacity. Where ideas come face to face to inspire and give us hope. At this time, our planet needs it most. Ideacity is a place where ideas come face to face to inspire and give us hope. At this time, our planet needs it most. Ideacity.